Well, good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think we will get started now. I'd like to welcome you to our Russia Futures session today with Dr. Andrey Kortunov. And I would like to thank the Carnegie Corporation for their support of this program. We are delighted to have Dr. Kortunov with us. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, we can have guests from Russia, even if they can't come here physically. Andrey Kortunov, as I'm sure you all know, is the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. He's one of Russia's best-known commentators on international affairs. He is a historian by training. He is also active in a number of different think tanks in Russia. He has held various positions at the Institute of the USA in Canada. He also served in the internship in the embassies in Washington and in London. He is the author of numerous articles and papers on different aspects of Russian foreign policy. So we're really delighted to have him here today. He was just telling me that he was reading the transcript of last night's debate between President Trump and Vice President Biden. I was surprised that there was a transcript, since I had trouble understanding what was said some of the time because both candidates were drowning each other out. So it'll be interesting to see what the impression was. Anyway, the title of his talk today is, "Should Putin Care About the US Elections?" As we listen to him, we do have a Q&A button. So if you do have questions for him, please start writing them in that function. He will speak, I will ask him a few questions, and then I will turn it over to the audience. So again, delighted to have you, Andrey, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Angela. First of all, let me say that I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very grateful to the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies for organizing this event. In the spirit of full disclosure, I have to confess that the Georgetown University was the first US university I was introduced to, because our compound, then it was the Soviet compound, is in Georgetown. So I took the liberty of using the public library of the Georgetown University for my diploma. And I still keep very good memories about the institution, about the spirit of Georgetown. So I'm happy that I can contribute to the intellectual discourse in this university, though in a very limited way, of course. Let me start with saying that to give a very brief answer to the question, which is the title of my presentation, whether Putin should care about the November elections in this country. My short answer would be no. He should not care. And this is the good news for Putin, because he has many other things to care about these days. However, the bad news is that he shouldn't care because the relationship will remain essentially the same, and it will be as sour as it is, with some maybe not very radical, though not insignificant changes. And in order to illustrate my point, let me make three statements. First of all, about the results of this administration, whether we can call Trump a friend of Putin or not. Second, whether indeed Biden can make this relationship much worse than it is right now. And let me conclude my brief presentation with a question about what could and should be done to put this uneasy relationship back on track, whether it is possible, whether it is feasible, and when can we expect to see a serious change for the better in this relationship. So let me start with Trump. As Vice President Biden maintained yesterday, Trump is Putin's puppy. I would question this assumption. And I think that we should ask ourselves a simple question. Whether the relationship between Russia and the United States got any better today compared to what we had in the end of 2016 when Donald Trump came to power. I think the answer is no. In fact, the relations today are much worse than they were 4 years ago. First of all, we completely destroyed symmetry as the most important instrument for managing this relationship. Trump had only one summit meeting with Putin, at least a full-fledged summit meeting with Putin in Helsinki in summer of 2018. And unfortunately, after this summit meeting, there was no progress in the relationship. On the contrary, the decline of the relationship decline of the relationship accelerated after this meeting. Second, we had almost a complete destruction of the strategic arms control between the two countries. First of all, of course, it was the INF agreement, which collapsed last year. Today, I think the odds are that the New START agreement will not last for too long. Again, it is important because strategic arms control used to be the cornerstone of the relationship. That was exactly what made this relationship so special and so important. And even when the two sides disagreed on almost everything, they tried to somehow preserve arms control and not to link it directly with other aspects of their relationship. Now it's almost gone. And finally, we don't have a lot of diplomacy between Russia and the United States these days. I would even venture to say that the Trump administration replaced diplomacy with sanctions. I'm not a great champion of sanctions. I think that it's a very rigid tool of foreign policy. But in terms of diplomacy, we saw major diplomatic wars between the two countries. We saw consulates shut down. We saw major reductions in the personnel of embassies. So clearly, this is a problem. One can say that, yes, this is right. The relationship is worse today than it was 4 years ago, but that's not because of Trump. Trump tried his best, but he was stopped. He was stopped by the Congress. He was stopped by the deep state. He was stopped by the Democratic opposition. And if Trump had it his way, probably he would have made many more concessions to Putin, and he would indeed serve as Putin's partner, if not servant. I would respectfully disagree with this view. First of all, on some issues, Trump was the initiator of negative trends in the relationship. If you take INF, for example, it was definitely not the initiative of the Hill. The idea came from the White House. And if you look at the US defense budget for 2020, you'll see that the Congress even decided to forbid Trump to purchase and to develop new INF missile systems. So basically, the Congress takes a more moderate attitude towards these alleged Russian violations of INF and is more inclined to preserve what is left from the treaty, if not de jure, at least de facto. So I wouldn't say that Trump was dragged into this confrontation. He clearly contributed to this confrontation a lot. But second, which is probably more important, is that basically we should judge politicians not by their words, but rather by their deeds. And it really doesn't matter what Trump wanted. What matters is what he accomplished. He indeed said a great number of good words about Putin, but he also praised the leaders of China and North Korea. He seems to have some kind of sympathy towards authoritarian leaders all over the world. So I wouldn't really buy, his compliments to Putin at the listed price. So from this viewpoint, I think that we cannot consider Trump to be a friend of Putin. We cannot consider Trump to be a puppy of Putin. And the reason for that is that Putin and Trump might coincide to some extent in their picture of the world. I think that indeed, Putin might be sympathetic to Trump as well, because both are nationalists, both are unilateralists, both are transactionalists. So I think they understand each other better than they understand, for example, Angela Merkel. However, my take is that Trump didn't have a lot to offer to Putin, and Putin couldn't offer Trump a lot in exchange. What actually Trump wanted from Putin was to break Russia's partnership with China, maybe to break Russia's alliance with Iran, and to get to the right side of history. Clearly, Putin was not ready to do that. Neither Trump was able to satisfy some of the expectations of Vladimir Putin. He couldn't help Putin on Ukraine. He couldn't lift sanctions. He could not. He was not ready to become a major investor into the Russian economy to help Putin with modernization of the Russian business. So basically, they didn't have much to trade, in my opinion, and that is the reason why the relationship basically went down the drain. Now, in terms of Biden, suppose Biden is elected and Russia has to deal with a new Democratic president. Some people here in Moscow, but I assume in Washington as well, argue that Biden will be much tougher, that we will see further decline of the relationship, more pressure on Moscow, new sanctions, and so on. I think that this perception has to be qualified. Indeed, I think that Biden doesn't fit the picture of the world that Putin has, unlike Trump. So to some extent, he's closer to Angela Merkel than to his potential predecessor. Biden will not praise Putin, that's clear. He will be very critical and very outspoken in his criticism of Vladimir Putin. So if I were a Russian, a Kremlin propaganda warrior, I would think about my narrative, how this narrative should be adjusted to the new situation. And I more or less, I can guess about what they will say when Trump, if Trump is defeated and Biden is elected, but that's not the topic of our conversation today. So in terms of the world outlook, Biden is a setback. But if we get down to specific aspects of the relationship, I think that we have to be a little bit more nuanced. For example, if I were working on strategic arms control, I would probably vote, I would support Biden because Biden seems to be more interested in arms control than Trump is. Now, if I were a Russian official working on Middle East, I would probably also say, well, you know, probably we can do something with Trump. Trump might get the United States back to JCPOA. He might restart a dialogue with Iranians, which will be in Russia's interest. He might change the US position towards the Middle East peace process. So there might be some new openings in the Middle East for very limited, very situational, but still some kind of collaboration between Moscow and Washington. Now, one can also say that Trump is likely to delegate more power to his associates, and he is likely to bring very qualified people to the State Department, to the National Security Council. These people are not necessarily Russophiles. They might be tough on the Kremlin and on Putin, but at least these people will be professional. They have experience, they are qualified. So basically we can work with them. On the other hand, of course, Biden means new problems. For example, it is clear that Biden will pay much more attention to Ukraine and is likely to increase the US support for Ukraine, though I have to say that it was President Trump, not President Obama, who made the decision to supply lethal weapons to Ukrainians. So I wouldn't say that Trump was ignoring Ukraine completely. But on Ukraine, I think Putin is likely to see a more significant, more formidable challenge from the United States if Biden is elected. I also think that Biden will push Russia much harder on human rights. I think it's clear. We might see more pressure. And he will definitely try to restore the transatlantic partnership, which will limit the space for maneuvering on the part of the Kremlin. Clear, though again, to be fair to Trump, I don't see any significant practical steps by Trump that, for example, were detrimental to NATO. I think essentially the United States met most of its commitments, and if you exclude anti-NATO rhetoric or anti-EU rhetoric by Donald Trump, I wouldn't really say that he inflicted so much damage upon NATO that it has to be restored. Maybe it's not because of Trump, maybe it's because of the US bureaucrats working on these issues, but I think that NATO is in a relatively good shape. Now, I think that the big question, of course, is whether Biden can introduce new sanctions. And many in Moscow are concerned exactly about a new wave of sanctions, which will be much more serious in terms of the impact on the Russian economy, on the Russian financial system, and on Russia's trade with other nations. I think that the jury is still in session, but my personal view on this is that Trump, so to say, has skimmed milk with sanctions. The administration, not Trump personally, but the administration introduced most of sanctions that the United States could have put in place without provoking a serious collateral damage to the international economic system and to its own economic interests. I think that there is a move in this country towards what I would call smart sanctions. Sanctions are getting more focused, more targeted, more professional. So I would be surprised if, for example, the Biden administration would go for excluding Russia, pushing Russia out of the SWIFT system, because that would really inflict serious damage upon the system. I don't think that Russia can be put in the position of Iran, for example, that the Biden administration would introduce sanctions against imports of the Russian gas and the Russian oil. I think it is too serious a step, and it would have grave consequences for the global economic system. So my take is that we will see new sanctions, and of course the Biden administration will try to make sanctions as painful for the Kremlin as possible, but these sanctions will not be reckless, and they will be limited given the place that Russia has in the global economy. And finally, having said that, let me address the last question about what one should do in order to change the relationship. If we exclude some radical versions, a regime change in Moscow and a new government in Russia which will get back to to the pattern of early 1990s. I don't think it will happen. But if we exclude, what we should exclude by definition, I think there are two things that the two sides could and probably should do in order to change the relationship. And both things are difficult. For Russia, I think it is critically important to reach out beyond the executive in this country. Since the summitry doesn't work any longer, since you cannot rely on your relations with the White House only, you have to reach out to the Congress, to the political establishment, to think tanks, to major media, and most importantly to the US public. Because unless the Russian image in the US public is not changed, no administration will be able to start a new reset, a new detente, or any other significant change in the relationship. It is difficult. I don't think that the Kremlin knows how to do that. I don't think that they are even considering this option, but I think it is indispensable. For the United States, I think, judging from history of this uneasy relationship, there is one, I think, rather trivial conclusion. Only a very strong US leader can fix relations with Moscow. You can be tough on Russia, you can defend your positions strongly, but basically, if you cannot consolidate domestic support, if you cannot overcome partisan issues in this relationship, if you cannot deal with the opposition inside the United States, if you cannot convince the Hill that what you are doing is right, there is no way you can fix this relationship. In this sense, I would say that for the Russian leadership, respect is more important than affinity. Russians do not need to like a US president, but they need to respect him. And if the Russian leadership feels that it deals with a weak president of the United States, it's practically impossible to reach a compromise. And all US presidents from Dwight Eisenhower to Ronald Reagan are manifestations of this rather trivial conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey. That was an excellent analysis of what hasn't happened, a great tour d'horizon. I would just make one small correction. When you were talking about the Middle East and then about the professionalization of the State Department, you said the word Trump, but I think you meant the word Biden when you were talking about what the policy toward Middle East might be and the professionalization of the State Department. I just wanted to correct that. So let me just ask you one question. You know, it's conventional wisdom in the United States to say that that Russia, the Kremlin, whatever you want to say, likes to see a divided, polarized America, an America that's kind of chaotic. The debate last night would be an excellent exhibit A of that. Are we exaggerating this? Are we overestimating the extent to which the people in power in Russia want to see a United States that's so chaotic?
Well, you know, I think that like in many other cases, you should distinguish between what the Russian leadership likes and what it needs. It might like to see a weakened United States because the United States is perceived as a kind of strategic adversary of Russia. I think that it is no longer the case, but anyway, this is the perception. However, when you talk to professionals, they would tell you that a stronger United States is better because the United States is an indispensable partner in very many international issues. You simply cannot resolve issues, let's say, in the Middle East without an active US participation. When the United States is strong, it becomes a part of the solution. Maybe the most important part of the solution if you take external factors. If the United States is weak, it becomes a part of the problem. It can become a spoiler. And again, from time to time we see such developments. So I think that instincts might push the Russian leadership towards appreciating a weak United States. But interests, especially if we're talking not about situational interests, not about grabbing, some influence in a particular country, but about long-term Russian interests, they should basically push the Russian leadership towards appreciating a strong United States. Of course, a strong United States does not mean an arrogant, a kind of United States aimed at unilateralism and domination. But unilateralism, I think, is also a manifestation of weakness rather than a manifestation of strength.
Thank you. One other question I have for you is, you said that Donald Trump didn't have much to offer Russia. If there were a President Joe Biden, would he have any more to offer Russia? I mean, obviously we can talk about arms control, but is there something beyond that that a Democratic administration would have to offer Russia that the Trump administration didn't?
Well, right now, it's hard to imagine that that a Biden administration would offer Russia a lot beyond arms control, maybe some relatively small regional issues. However, I think that, and basically that was reflected in one of the recent Putin statements, that we should work with any administration that might come to power in January of next year, and basically we do not, we should not put any, exercise any preferences. I think that paradoxically, there is one positive thing. There might be, at least that's my guess, there might be one positive thing if Biden wins. I think that the US campaign about the alleged Russian interference in the election will be probably less loud than in case Trump wins. And that will not remove this problem from the relationship, but this problem might be of less importance if Democrats win, because if Democrats lose once again, Russia will continue to be a usual standard explanation of why they lost. And then in early next year, we'll see a lot of political movements regarding the alleged interference, even if this interference is negligible in terms of its influence on the outcome of the elections. A lot will depend on the specific decisions by the Biden administration. For example, we still don't know about how much influence the left part of the Democratic Party might exercise. I think that there might be, for example, if Biden reconsiders the Trump approach to climate change, there might be opportunities for some degree of cooperation on climate and maybe on environment as well. But my bet is that in 4 years from now, we will see a real change on both sides, in terms of the leadership, in terms of perceptions, in terms of priorities in foreign policy. And if there is a real change between Russia and the United States, I think it might take place in 2025 rather than in 2021.
Okay, that raises a whole lot of other questions, but I think I'm now going to turn to the questions from our audience. And the first one is from Marcia Olive, and she wants to know, what is your view of the open letter signed by many US experts on a selective engagement strategy with Russia? How would you weigh the relative importance of the various rebuttals? So there was the first letter, as you know, then there was a second letter rebutting it, and then there was a third letter from Central Europeans. There may be more letters. Anyway, tell us how you evaluate them.
Well, let me say that I have good friends among signatories of both letters. I would say even all the three letters, because I have some contacts in Central Europe as well. But essentially, I always believed maybe it's my liberal instincts suggest that it's better to talk than not to talk, even if it is very difficult to reach an agreement. In my view, more contacts, more communication lines wouldn't hurt. It is not really a guarantee for a change in the relationship, but neither it is a concession, neither it is a favor that one side grants to the other side. So if I were to select between the three papers what I could co-sign, I would definitely co-sign the first one, because if we do not start a dialogue, we exclude even very low chances of moving ahead. And let me also say that it is important to send a signal not just to the Kremlin, but also to the Russian political establishment in general, that the United States remains open to a dialogue, that there is no doom in this confrontation, that it's not something that will last forever. So I appreciate this encouragement from a group of very distinguished and very knowledgeable people. Of course, there is logic, certain logic in the second letter as well. But I think that we should try to be a little bit more optimistic, sorry, even if we don't have many reasons to be optimistic.
Okay, thank you. Let me remind people to use the Q&A function. I see a couple of you have used the chat function. I will get to that too, but Q&A is probably the more appropriate one. Next question from Bruce Parrott. If Trump loses in November and the thorough investigation of his crimes ensues, that will probably produce more bad press for Russia. Won't that worsen US-Russian relations further?
Well, I think that, definitely, I think that might have a negative impact on the relationship. And by the way, I'd like to say that I'm very glad to see, or at least to listen to Marcia and to Bruce as well. But let me say that unfortunately, in this situation, there are no good outcomes for Russia, because if Trump wins, Russia will be accused of supporting him and maybe even, contributing to his victory. If he loses, definitely Russia will also get a lot of bad press, because Russia will be associated with Trump. So in this particular case, I don't see a good outcome for Russia under any circumstances. So there'll be a pause in the relationship, and I think that if Biden wins, correct me if I'm wrong, but if Biden wins, the transition will be very protracted and very painful. Not just in terms of recognizing the victory, but in terms of the transition team. I think that the Biden transition team cannot expect a lot of cooperation from Trump's people. And that means that the pause in the relationship, which happens every time there is a new leader in the White House, the pause is likely to be longer than otherwise. So I don't expect any active US-Russian dialogue earlier than late spring of next year, if Biden wins.
Okay, thanks. The next question is from Mark Katz. If Biden is elected, couldn't he and Putin agree to a New START just after Biden's inauguration? Biden would surely want to preserve this Obama-era agreement.
Well, I think that, again, I'm not following the US domestic politics as well as I used to, but I think it will partially depend on what kind of agreement Biden would like to maintain. Would he like just to extend the START agreement without loading it, with any additional conditions? Because my take is that Biden would probably like to extend the agreement, but if there are no changes to the agreement, it's hard to tell, how Republicans will react to that. Maybe Republicans on the Hill would put it under scrutiny and would like to put it to add some provisions like the ones that are now discussed between Russia and the United States. But I think that we would definitely, and I think that Putin would definitely go for it if Biden offers it, because I think that if Biden is elected, after some period of hesitation, they would in the Kremlin, they would like to demonstrate that it's not the end of the world, and that they can still work with Americans, and it would be important to demonstrate at least some success in some area, to demonstrate that life goes on and we still keep contacts and we can even agree on something with Americans. So I'm sure that if such an initiative comes from the Biden administration, it will find a receptive audience in Moscow.
Andrey, can I just ask you a subsidiary question? Is it true that the Duma would have to ratify just an extension of New START? Because if you're talking about, the inauguration's January the 20th, New START expires February 5th. Would there be enough time, even if the Kremlin agrees to that? Would the Duma then be able to ratify it?
Well, and Angela, I don't think that you have any inflated perceptions of the autonomy of the lower chamber of the Russian parliament. So frankly, I don't even know whether it has to ratify it or not. But I'm sure that if it has to ratify it, it will ratify it. At least the current composition of the State Duma is not likely to question any recommendations that it might receive from the Kremlin. So it is clearly not an issue. There are people in Moscow who believe that the New START is not a great treaty, and that probably we can live without this treaty even better. However, I think that these considerations will be subordinated to the political impact of a prolongation of the agreement. The real problem might come from any intention of the US side to impose additional conditions on Russia. For example, verification or special restrictions on the new types of Russian strategic systems which are already deployed or which are close to being deployed. I think that what the Russian leadership would like to see is that it can go on with its current program of nuclear modernization. And the START agreement allows that. But the Trump administration apparently wants more. It wants to constrain Russia in its defense posture beyond the treaty. And that is why, if you listen to Rybkov, he says that it's not a very, optimistic scenario for the extension of the treaty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. So next question here is, from Bill Courtney. And he asks, how might the Kremlin view the Trump administration's sudden new interest in concluding a political framework accord prior to the US election as a precondition to extending New START?
Well, I think that they understand the change of the attitude, and probably they would be happy to assist Donald Trump. But I think that their problem is that that the Trump administration wants to have its cake and to eat it. It wants to demonstrate its inclination to sign the treaty, but at the same time, it wants to impose additional conditions upon Russia. And that is the problem. So if this position is negotiable, they can clearly come with some general political statement. After all, it's just a statement. It's a declaration of intentions. But I think that what the Kremlin would try to avoid is an impression that Russia is yielding under the US pressure, and that Moscow needs this treaty more than the United States. Because this is what you can get from the rhetoric on the US side, that you want the treaty, you are desperate to have this treaty, okay. But if you want to have the treaty, you should agree to a couple of additional conditions that we are likely to introduce. And I think that this is a slippery slope, because Putin doesn't yield under pressure generally, and for him the treaty is important politically, but strategically I think he is ready to become a nuclear isolationist. His recent statements are saturated with the ideas that no matter what happens to arms control, Russia will defend its security. It will always protect itself. It will maintain the second strike capabilities. It will always inflate US efforts in strategic defenses. So if things get really sour, we can always count on our missiles, our new systems, whatever. So my take is that unfortunately the importance of arms control went down significantly, not just in the United States, but in Russia as well. And I just compare how Russia fought for the preservation of the ABM treaty and how it reacted to the US threat to withdraw from the INF treaty. I think 20 years ago, arms control was much more central in the Russian foreign policy agenda than it is today. Of course, I might be wrong, but that's the impression I have from the outside.
Thank you. Question from David Abramson. Could you elaborate on your claim that Russia needs a strong United States? Do you consider the US to have been strong in the 1990s, despite the fact that Russia was not happy with how the US treated it? Also, do you believe that the leadership in Moscow believes that the US is in decline? If so, the fact that a strong US benefiting Russia could be irrelevant.
No, it's a good question, but I think that it depends on how you define strength. Mm-hmm. Russia, not just Russia, I think everyone needs a predictable United States, a consistent US foreign policy, a reliable US partner, even if the partner is tough. And this is something that can bring more stability in the world. What we see today, and again, you are in a much better position to judge about that than I am, but we see that the United States sometimes is not predictable, is not very consistent, and that creates additional risks for both US allies and US adversaries. From this viewpoint, I think that Putin respects political leaders who are predictable and who can make commitments and who can stay by their commitments. In terms of the US decline, you are right. I think that there is a perception that this decline is more or less irreversible, not necessarily because the United States gets weaker, but because others get stronger. And I have to tell you that I participated in a number of expert discussions about the Biden administration, and many Russian economists, I don't know, maybe they are dead wrong on that, but they believe that if Biden comes to power, the economic decline of the United States is likely to accelerate rather than to slow down. At least there is such a perception. But I think that this is exactly the one of the dangers, because if the United States declines, and if it declines fast, a decline in power becomes less predictable and maybe more adventure-seeking. If you look back into history, one of the reasons why Europe got into the First World War was arguably a rapid decline of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And this decline led Vienna believe that war can be a solution to their problems. Again, I don't want to compare the United States with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I would also, really caution about these predictions of the U.S. decline. I think that the U.S. political system and the economic system is very adaptive, and in many ways, we still live in a unipolar world. If you look at the financial system, if you look at the technological system, I don't think that China will match the United States anytime soon. But this is a question which is widely disputed in Russia these days about the trajectory of the U.S. development and what it might mean for the rest of the world. The most important issue for Russia is, of course, the impact of the US sanctions on the rest of the international community. Because what we see right now is a situation when the United States clearly demonstrates its central role in the global economic, financial, and technological system. And even our Chinese friends, if you take the private sector, are very reluctant to play with the US sanctions against Russia and to make any steps that might initiate US sanctions against them. So the United States, in this sense, is still the only superpower.
Thank you. Question here from Mikhail Filipov. Could you explain in more detail your claim that sanctions do not work? In particular, we see that the Russian economy is getting weaker and weaker, thus the Kremlin has less and less resources for aggressive actions and for a military buildup. So, question of sanctions.
Well, of course, sanctions do have a negative impact on the Russian economy. And I do not share views of those experts who believe that sanctions are good, that import substitution works fine. There are certain sectors of the Russian economy that might benefit from sanctions, but generally the economy suffers. However, the question about sanctions is whether whether sanctions can achieve the goals that the initiators of sanctions policies try to meet. For example, if you take the sanctions that were put in place after Crimea, it didn't lead to any change of the Russian policy towards Crimea. If you look at sectoral sanctions linked to the situation in East Ukraine, at least, again, we don't see any change of the Russian position on these issues. Frankly, I think that sanctions can work efficiently only if a number of preconditions are met. First of all, sanctions can work only if it's a long-term policy. So the margin of safety for the Russian economy is very significant. And we've seen it over the last 6 years. Second, sanctions can work only if they are very specific. And in case of US sanctions, the problem is that sanctions are very generic. US sanctions are now about everything. They are about Syria, about Ukraine, about chemical weapons, about human rights. And if sanctions are about everything, it means that they're about nothing. And it means that you do not create incentives for the object of sanctions to change its behavior. And that's exactly what we see in case of Russia. Then sanctions should be flexible. Sanctions is a kind of negative trade deal between the two sides. If your side, if the other side makes a small step in your direction, you should be in a position to make a small step in their direction. And we don't see it with US sanctions. With US sanctions, it is easier, relatively easy to introduce sanctions. It is very difficult to lift sanctions. There is no flexibility which is needed to make sanctions efficient. And finally, sanctions can work when sanctions are universal. And if sanctions are not universal, if there are loopholes in the application, then the efficiency of sanctions go down. So you can argue that Putin didn't do something because of sanctions, but this is just a hypothetical assumption. What we know that he didn't change his policies because of sanctions, and that's fact. Whether he would have gone for Kiev or whether he would have invaded Estonia if there had been no sanctions, this is something that we don't know. That's why, I'm a little bit hesitant to take it as a proof that sanctions really work.
Thank you. Next question from Charles Dolan. You mentioned that Russia needs to reach out beyond the administration to the Congress, think tanks, the media, and the general public. They did try this in the past with some success, until the demonstrations around the third term, Crimea, and other events have also hurt. Do you agree that unless there are some changes in behavior, that any public diplomacy effort will be fruitless?
Well, of course, in the end of the day, no public diplomacy can replace changes in behavior or changes in attitude. However, right now, I don't see any major openings for changes in behavior. But having said that, I still believe that there could be some symbolic actions short of a radical change of the Russian foreign policy that would help to start changing attitudes here in the United States. For example, I see no reason why Putin cannot shut down the troll factories in Russia. I think that would not be a capitulation. It's not as central to the Putin's foreign policy as some other issues, but it would still send an important signal. He could say, look, we are concerned about foreign engagement, foreign intervention. You are concerned, but we'd like to show our good intentions, and we are going to deal with people who try to interfere into political processes in other countries from the territory of the Russian Federation. I think that's relatively easy, and I would start with such things. Of course, later on, some changes in the foreign policy are unavoidable, but I don't think that they will come anytime soon.
Thank you. Question now from Vadim Grishin. Could you please elaborate on your assessment of the Chinese factor in US-Russian relations? And I guess specifically, as you said, Trump himself, the administration hoped that they could, quote unquote, peel Russia away from China. Where does China fit into this?
Well, first of all, let me say that, of course, China remains the most important strategic partner of Russia. It's not the largest trading partner of the Russian Federation. We trade with the European Union more than with China. I think with the European Union right now it's about 40%. With China, I think it's 17 or 18%. We receive more investment from Europe than from China. So definitely this pivot does not mean that China can replace the West and especially Europe for the Russian Federation. Moreover, I would say that, of course, this year will be a difficult year for the Russian-Chinese economic cooperation because of the Chinese slowdown, because of the decline of oil prices, and because of the economic recession. So I don't expect the Russian-Chinese trade to go much above $100 billion this year. Next year we might have a little bit more, but basically it is not really the most important trade relations, not only for China. For China it is pretty small, but even for Russia. But in the strategic terms, definitely these tensions between the United States and China create an additional incentive for both Russia and China to stick together. I don't think that we will have a formal alliance, but the military cooperation is clearly on the rise. Last year, Russia even decided to share with China very sensitive early warning technologies against nuclear attack. I think it's a very interesting case. Russia used to put India above China in terms of the modern weapons sales, but now China and India are on the same footing, which is also an important shift. So I think that this will go on. This year, of course, our social humanitarian contacts suffered a lot because you don't see Chinese tourists in Moscow any longer, and educational contacts were curtailed because of the pandemic. But I think that the concern in Moscow is that we are moving in the direction of a bipolar world. And if this world is going to be rigid, if it is almost like it was during the Cold War, it is definitely not in Russia's interest, because we will lose the freedom of maneuver, and we might have problems with countries like India, which I have already mentioned, countries like Vietnam. We will have to take sides. And this is not good, because in this bipolar system, the asymmetry between the Russian and the Chinese potential will become more explicit. Right now, Putin is able to avoid a position of a junior partner, but if things evolve in the direction of a rigid bipolarity, it would be much more difficult than it is right now. That's why I think for Russia it is important to engage China into multilateral projects like SCO, like BRICS and others that can somehow camouflage this asymmetry in potential between the two countries. Now, finally, let me say that if we follow Kissinger and his geopolitics, you have trilateral relationship, and the side that has better, the angle that has better relations with two other angles than they have between themselves has a superior position. So I'm sure that Putin would love to become a broker between the United States and China, but he cannot do it because US-Russian relations are no better than relations between the United States and China. So basically, the Kissinger model is not likely to work here.
Thank you. Question from Jill Doherty. Andrey, what is the Kremlin's reaction, not just formal statements, but its real reaction to Trump's ordering the US military to assess how quickly it could put new warheads on US missiles if New START is not extended?
Well, you know, I think that the Kremlin has been working on its fallback position for some time already. They wouldn't state it officially, but I think that there is a lot of pessimism about our common ability to maintain arms control, be it bilateral or multilateral. So they of course try to save the NPT agreement and CTBT agreement and some other agreements, but I think that there are many in the political establishment who believes that this train has left the station already, and this model of arms control, both bilateral US-Russian / US-Soviet arms control and multilateral arms control, is disintegrating, and it is irreversible. So in my conversations, I now often hear that they're thinking about a new model of arms control. And at the same time, of course, unfortunately, there are people, especially in the military, but not only, who believe that we do not need any arms control at all, that we can live without arms control. And if the United States destroys arms control, it will simply have to pay the price for that. And we will have to protect our security through our national technical means, meaning, of course, investing more in strategic arms. So I'm not very optimistic about future, but definitely Russia will not be the leader in destroying multilateral arms control agreements. If it happens, it can go with the wind, but it will not initiate these negative trends. That's what I think is clear.
Thank you, Andrey. So we have 8 more minutes and 3 more questions. So I'm going to read all 3 of them and then give you a chance to respond as you will. Roger Kangas has a question about the snapback sanctions on Iran. This will be a topic of UN discussion in the coming month. Is it in Russia's interest to simply push this to after the election, thereby avoiding either supporting or opposing a Trump foreign policy priority? Sam Chat has a question about whether the COVID-19 pandemic has affected Russian foreign policy in any way. And then the final question from Jacqueline Rasdan, which is a more general question to end on, I guess. To what degree do you believe that we're still seeing the legacy of the Cold War in terms of Russian-American relations? And what does that mean for future generations in US-Russian relations?
Well, on Iran, I think that probably indeed Russia would prefer to put this issue on a back burner, expecting the new administration to take a more benign attitude towards Iran in general and towards sanctions in particular. That's my assessment. I think that I might be wrong, but that's how I think. In terms of COVID-19, you know, it is surprising that so far COVID-19 had very little impact on the Russian foreign policy. But I would venture to say that, in my opinion, the pandemic creates a number of tactical opportunities for Russia and a number of strategic challenges. Russia might try to use the vacuum of power, these inward priorities of major international players. But I think strategically, it might get out of this crisis weaker than other major nations. And it might also see a rise of isolationism inside the country. And I already mentioned this common US-China bipolarity, which is not in Russia's interest. And the third question was
about how much we're still dealing with the legacy of the Cold War in our relations, and how will this affect future generations?
Well, you know, it's again, it's an interesting question because 10 years ago, and well, maybe 7 years ago, I thought that this legacy is gone. And we have a new generation of people who got socialized and professionally trained after the end of the Cold War. And these people will have a very different approach, different mentality. But you know what? I was wrong. And it seems that I don't know how to explain it. Is it, you know, institutional memories or genetic memories? But I'm struck to see how easy it was to get back to where we were not even 30, but maybe 40 years ago. I cannot explain it. I think it's really deplorable. I think it's something that we should reflect upon. But bad habits die hard. And I see it on both sides, maybe more on the Russian side, but also on the US side as well. However, I also see changes, and these are not necessarily changes I would like to see, but the attitudes, priorities, perceptions are changing, identities are changing. That's why I am talking about 2024, when we have a major generation change in many places, not just in the United States, but also in maybe in Russia, maybe in Europe, maybe in China. And this is my hope. I cannot prove it, but I think that might be the beginning of a very serious global change that will have a serious impact on future generations. And maybe finally we will get rid of the old Cold War mentality and Cold War practices.
I think we need to end on an optimistic note and hope that at least for the next US administration and Russia, there'll be more interchange between civil society, young people. We need even to restore some of that. Andrey, thank you very much for an extremely informative and somewhat provocative talk. We've really benefited a lot from it. We hope to have you back when we know the result of our own election, whenever that is. And meanwhile, again, I'm sure that everyone who tuned in will join me in thanking you for giving your time for this very interesting session. Thanks.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Angela.
For your questions. Thank you.